Let's open our Bibles to Numbers chapter 31. Numbers chapter 31, verse 1. And this is important to note that this command comes from the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel, and then afterward you'll be gathered to your people." So one of Moses' last acts as leader of the nation is to execute God's vengeance against the people of Midian. Now remember, these are the guys that were trying to curse Israel. And it's interesting that Midianites are living in the land of Moab, and Moab is a nation that descended from Lot. And they weren't going to be attacked by Israel. They sort of provoked this attack, and remember Balaam being hired by Balak and trying to get him to curse the people. And then it was Balaam's counsel to send in the Moabite young women and sort of entice Israel into idolatry and sin. And of course it worked, and it was very catastrophic for the nation of Israel. And so God says, I want to judge them. Remember, the Bible says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So God is going to take vengeance. God is a God who judges. You can't have a proper biblical position about the nature of God that doesn't include God judging. If God doesn't judge sin, he's not good. Sin has to be judged. Thank God that as we just took communion and remember Jesus taking the judgment of God for us. There's a way to be saved, but it's not that judgment disappears or never happens. We escape judgment because judgment was meted out on Jesus. The full, entire penalty for sin, which is death, was paid for by Jesus. When he cries out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He is bearing in his body the guilt and penalty for sin, which is death. And somehow Jesus becomes a sacrifice for us and atones for it. But the judgment of God is poured out on Christ. He's beaten, he's spit upon, he's rejected, he's humiliated, he suffers and he dies, and not only physically, but whatever happens spiritually as God makes him to be sin for us, though he knew no sin. So God is a God who does judge, and apart from Jesus, we're under the judgment of God. We would all be judged. And nations are under the judgment of God, and they'll be held accountable. And so this is judgment from God on the Midianites. And he tells that to Moses. That's Moses' last action. So Moses tells the people in verse 3 to arm themselves, that they're going to go and take vengeance on the Lord, from the Lord on Midian. And verse 4, the strategy is they only take 1,000 from each of the tribe. So it's not the whole nation going, but they get 12,000 armed for war altogether. And then if you jump down to verse 7, they war against the Midianites just as the Lord commanded Moses, and they killed them. They killed all the males. They killed the leaders. The kings are named there in verse 8. But notice at the end of verse 8, who else gets killed? Balaam. The end of verse 8 says, Balaam, the son of Beor, they also killed with the sword. Now remember, at the end of his story, it says Balaam went to his place. And you could assume that meant he went back to where he was originally from. Remember, he got called from over 300 miles away. He's from further north, up probably like what we would call modern-day Iraq. He's up by the Euphrates River. He's well known. He's sort of an international curser. He's got a reputation internationally that you can hire this guy, and when you get this guy to curse your enemies, their eyeballs fall out, or whatever happens. They go blind, they die, they lose their hair, their crops don't come in or whatever. So they try to hire this guy. He's a big shot, but he doesn't go back. Remember, Balak said, look, I'll give you riches. And remember, Balaam was giving with his mouth. He was saying, look, even if you gave me all the gold and silver in your whole house, I wouldn't, I can't say more than what God says. But he doesn't go back. He stays behind because his plan was effective, and he's made himself a big shot. And he stuck around and didn't go back home. And remember one of the verses in the New Testament, it talks about Balaam, how he's like the false prophets, even of Peter's day or of our day. And it says he loved the wages of unrighteousness. The wages of unrighteousness is the phrase that's used. Sometimes when you're unrighteous, you get wages. Like if you rob a bank, and you get away with it. And then you've got the wages of unrighteousness. And now you got this money. You're like, oh man, I'm rolling in the dough. And then you want to rob another bank. And if you live in sin, you're going to get the wages of unrighteousness. But what are the wages of unrighteousness? What does Paul say in Romans? The wages of sin is death. But the gift of God is eternal life. And so Balaam, he obtained the wages of unrighteousness, but he didn't enjoy them very long. It's short-lived, like always. You can be living in sin and be thinking that you're benefiting from it, but not for very long. He didn't enjoy them very long, and he dies with the people of Midian. And then in verse 9, it's interesting because we had read that they killed the men. They were to execute God's vengeance on the whole group, but instead we read it was only the men. And so verse 9, the children of Israel took the women of Midian captive. Now, why is that important? We'll see in a moment. Moses becomes very upset about this. We're going to see in our chapters, we looked already at chapter 32 this morning, so you know. But we're going to see Moses blow a gasket twice. He's very concerned about two things. One is this first chapter, and the other one is in the next chapter. But why is this significant? Well, we just talked about it. Balaam's counsel was the women of Midian, and they're enticing these guys into sin, and so they go and they kill all the men, and they come back with all the women. You think, what did we just go through? But isn't this a picture of the flesh? It reminds me of that proverb in the New Testament, quoted from the Old Testament, but it's interesting that it's one of the proverbs that's brought forward. Like a dog returns to its vomit, which is always a pleasant proverb to think about. Like a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. I remember when I first got saved, I'd never read the Bible, and there's all these crazy things that are in the Bible. People are like, oh, the Bible's boring. Like, you never read it, dude. It is anything but boring. There might be lists of names that are in certain places. Okay, maybe that part is hard. The Bible is not boring. Anytime you got proverbs about human beings licking vomit, that's not boring. That's gross, whatever you want to call it. And I had a friend, he would deal with anybody he felt like was backsliding, he would confront them with the phrase, you vomit licker. As only a 17-year-old guy, overly zealous and super on fire for the Lord, could do it. I think he taught a devotion one time at one of our early camps or something about people who are vomit lickers. It's always stuck with me. And here it is. So you think, what are you guys doing? Like, isn't this the very thing that got you in trouble? And now God's executing judgment on these people for their wickedness, and you're sort of taking the cream off the top. Like, well, we'll just take this. Well, that's not what God wanted. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. So God wanted a judgment to come upon the people, and they spared also all the children, but they burned all the cities with fire. They took the cattle, the flocks, and all the goods. And then they came, and then verse 14, Moses was very angry with the officers of the army, and he said to them in verse 15, have you kept all the women alive? Look, he says. He'll say that again later. He said, look, hey, kind of a thing. These women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. So, verse 17, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who's not known a man intimately. The one exception, the place where there could be mercy, someone could be integrated into the society of Israel. They could become part of Israel. He says, the young girls who've not known a man intimately could be spared. But everybody else is judged. Now, this is very severe, and it's very, very harsh. It's a genocide. It's a genocide against this group of people. It's not a large group of people, but it's a genocide. It's a wipe these guys out. And it's important when we come to these passages, we don't need to make an excuse for them. It's flat out. God said, this is what I'm doing. God judges people. Well, there's a reality about history. It's very hard to find a society or a civilization that lasts more than a couple hundred years. What happens to them? They get wiped out. There are whole, huge, amazing, advanced civilizations in Central America, huge pyramids that they built, amazing society that at one time must have been there, and the ruins are there. Their history's gone. The people are gone. What happened to them? They got judged. They got wiped out. The Greeks, this pinnacle of human learning and society, where is that? Wiped out. What about the Romans? Wiped out. What about the Babylonians, Assyrians? How long do the Assyrians terrorize the world? A little while, but they get wiped out. How about the Babylonians? A little while, they get wiped out. How about the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, the Americans? We're about at our shelf life, aren't we? How long does a group, people came to this country and, there were nations already here. What happened to those nations? A genocide. And what's going to happen to this nation? I'm not saying it's going to happen today or something, but it's just history. History's on my side. There's no exceptions. Civilizations spill blood, and God holds them accountable, and God brings a judgment. God allows a judgment to come, and it will come. And later on in Numbers, we'll get to the verse later, but I just want to read it quickly. And in this context, God's bringing a judgment on the Midianites. We don't have all the details about them, but we know that what they're doing involves sexual immorality, and it involves the worship of pagan gods. That always leads to pregnancies that are unexpected or unwanted, which always leads to abortion throughout history, including our current history. A sexual revolution will always lead to pregnancies, and pregnancies that are not wanted will always be ended, and it will end with the death of the baby. And God holds societies accountable for murder and for death. I want you to listen to what we read later when he's talking about murder and the accountability and the cities of refuge. In Numbers 35, verses 33 and 34, God says, "You shall not pollute the land where you are." Listen, "for the blood defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. Therefore, do not defile the land which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the children of Israel." So what God is saying is that I hold societies, nations, civilizations accountable for the blood. God knows every single soul that's been murdered. You know how many people are going to be murdered in Chicago this year? Hundreds. Hundreds of people. You know how many people will be murdered in America? We got a serious problem of murder in our country. And all that blood is going to be required. How many babies have been aborted since we made it legal to abort babies? Millions of people have been killed because they were inconvenient. All that blood is in our ground. And God says, I know the blood that's in the ground, and it is inexcusable, and there's a judgment. So when we look at these genocide passages, I think our tribalism that leads us to commit genocide, there's no justification for that. But God will allow civilizations to be wiped out. God judges civilizations. He judges them usually with one group judging another group, but the group that judged ends up being judged by another group. It's a vicious cycle of sin that keeps going on in the world. This is tragic. It's horrible. We wish that none of these Midianites, we wish they were all in heaven. We wish they all got saved. But there's a certain reality. The only ones who are spared are the women who've never known a man. Why is that important? Because there's a thing called sexually transmitted diseases. You know the percentage in our country? You know how many? We have incurable sexually transmitted diseases, and we're having an epidemic. We're at epidemic level. And some of them, you get them, you don't ever get rid of them. There's only one way to get them. Right? This is a society, these Midianites is a society, they had been practicing such practices that brought them past the point of no return, and God's bringing a judgment against them, and we wish it wasn't so, but it's a fact. This may not go over well when your Facebook friends are trying to challenge you, and you're going to tempted to get into a Facebook argument. Don't. It's not worth it. But there's a fact of the Bible that judgment comes, and we will be no exception to it. And there's plenty of blood in our land that we've spilled that we're accountable for. Thousands and thousands and thousands, right? We've already experienced part of the judgment when we had a civil war that led to the deaths of so many Americans. But how much blood was crying out to the ground for judgment at that point that we were accountable for, and we had a partial judgment, an implosion of our own society where we fought ourselves. It's just judgment. So judgment on the land because of blood, and judgment has come upon all lands since the beginning. Every civilization that's ever risen to prominence has always declined and been wiped out, or declined into, what is obviously a judgment. So back to our chapter and considering this, that these guys are going to be wiped out. The one exception is the girls who've not known anybody, and they're going to be spared, and they'll actually become part of Israel. But the rest are going to be judged. So after that, verse 19 and 20, they're unclean because they've been involved in this warfare. So they've touched the dead, and so they have to purify themselves. So they go into the purification process. And also verse 20, everything that they have been clothed with also has to go through the purification process. And they're told in verse 21 that it's the ordinance of the Lord. And all the stuff is going to be cleansed. All the gold and silver, verse 22, the bronze, all those precious metals will be purified by fire, and they'll be put in the fire, and they'll be made clean. And then what can't go through the fire will be purified with the water of purification. So there's this picture that this judgment has come. It's become because of sin. You're unclean. All the stuff is unclean. And everything needs to be purified because this is a wickedness, and it's a judgment upon wickedness. In our country, as we've scoffed at God, and our state has suffered some of the worst drought in our history. I think the 3 or 4 worst years we've ever had since recorded history in California have been a drought, and we're experiencing some of the worst fires that we've ever had. And yet at the same time, we're telling God, we don't want you to tell us anything about anything. And you see things happening, and you see a division in the country. And you see, you think, well, who knows what the Lord is going to do, what he will allow. But we're certainly impure, so you see this judgment coming upon wickedness. And so Israel participated. They were used by God for the judgment, but they themselves are to be getting right with the Lord, cleansing this stuff. So the very next thing is the cleansing. Then starting in verse 27, they're told to divide up all the spoils, and it's going to be divided in verse 27 between those who took part in the war and then those who stayed behind. So remember, only it was 1,000 from each tribe, and they get a certain portion, and then the rest of the people get a portion. So the people who didn't fight still get a reward. So remember, it's like what David said, when the people who go to battle get the reward, the people who stay behind the stuff get a reward. So it's divided up, and there's a division of the plunder, and then out of that spoils that they got, part of it belongs to God and goes to the Levites. Where they're told in verse 28 and 29 they're supposed to take a tribute, a certain number percentage-wise from those that were in the army, because obviously they end up with more, and a certain percentage that comes from the people, the nation. Verse 28 says it's 1 out of 500 for those who went into the battle, and then verse 30 says it's 1 out of 50 for that went to the whole nation. And then we get all the detail of that. I don't want to read through all the detail from verse 32 all the way down to verse 47. If you like detail and you're an accountant, you can enjoy that. It was written by an accountant. They know how many. They counted all of them. And why is that important? Because you've got to count every 50th goes to the Lord, which then goes to the Levites. That's their portion. So you get all those details. And then there's a really interesting thing. Notice verse 48 and 49. We get through that part and the listing, and then verse 48, the officers who were over the thousands of the army and the captains of thousands and the captains of hundreds, they come near to Moses, and they said to Moses, your servants have taken account of the men of war who are under our command. And notice the last phrase, not a man of us is missing. They wiped out the whole Midianites. They didn't lose a guy. So here's an important thing. What did God tell them? One of you can chase 1,000. You do what I say. One of you, God's going to bless them. Is this because it's a whole nation full of John Rambos? These guys all like crazy Chuck Norris. They don't ever lose. They're standing there, machine gun bullets are flying all around them, and they don't ever get hit magically. Yeah, actually. But it's not them, it's the Lord. So they realize, okay, roll call, they realize all the guys are here. Nobody died. And so they respond with worship. Look at verse 50. Because of that, they said, we brought an offering for the Lord. What every man found of ornaments of gold, armlets, bracelets, signet rings, earrings, necklaces, to make an atonement for ourselves before the Lord. God counted our lives precious, and we were able to take these spoils. We're the soldiers. We want to give it back to the Lord because these are our lives. God saved our lives. We want to give our lives. And this is a great example of the heart of worship. It's a tragic situation of warfare and judgment and all of that. But when we're serving the Lord and we see God's hand upon us, or we see the Lord working in a certain way, the more you give yourself to the Lord, or the more you take risks serving the Lord, or venture out for the Lord, and then you see God working, the more your worship is prompted. I always pray for people when I see them not really having a heart for worship. I always pray that the Lord will work in their lives in such a way, because worship is always a reaction. We love Him because He first loved us. And the person who doesn't have a lot of love going back to the Lord really is a person who hasn't experienced it. There's a wall that's up. They're self-protecting or whatever. They're not venturing out. They don't have anything to be thankful for because they haven't taken any risks. But I think these guys recognize, man, we were the guys. We went out there, but God did this crazy thing. We want to give all the gold and silver, everything back to Him. This is all that we took. It all belongs to the Lord. So they free will offering it back to the Lord. It wasn't required, but like all worship, just free from their hearts. So they took all of it from Him, and then they gave it to the Lord. And they brought it into the tabernacle of meeting, verse 54 says, and they kept it there as a memorial for the children of Israel before the Lord. So this that came in, and they would always see it and go, man, that's when those guys, they went for it. God, not one person was missing. What an encouragement for the rest of their history. We can face what we're facing because God's always taking care of us. And those victories that God gives us are meant to be memorials for us to keep trusting in the Lord. So that gets us to chapter 32. We looked at this morning. This is a very important chapter because of the decision that's made here by three of the tribes of Israel. And primarily it's Reuben and Gad. We find out later Manasseh is also involved in this decision. Manasseh actually will have their portion. Some of them will settle in the land and some of them settle on the outside. But verse 1 says that the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, had a very great multitude of livestock. And they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place for livestock. And so they came and spoke. They named the names of the cities in verse 3, and then verse 4, they said, the country which the Lord defeated before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock. Your servants have livestock. Therefore, you see the logic? This is a land for livestock. We've looked at it. We have livestock. It's a land for livestock. Therefore, this is our portion. That's literally what they say. Therefore, they said, if we found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. And then this phrase, if you're an underliner, this is one of the sentences to underline. They say, do not take us over the Jordan. Now, to me, the idea of crossing the Jordan River, leaving the wilderness behind, leaving Egypt and bondage to sin, leaving the flesh and the wandering and the struggle against the flesh behind, and crossing over into the new Christian life. Really, if you're going to look for the typology of this journey, Egypt is sin. You're brought out of sin. It's the flesh. That's the wilderness. You're not living in the flesh. You're now walking in the Spirit. And that somebody would say, I don't want to walk in the Spirit. I mean, like you're cutting off the typology here. They say, don't take us over the Jordan. This is fine. We're content to live over here. And I think, oh God, please don't leave me on the other side of the Jordan. I mean, my only hope is that I want to walk in the Spirit. I want the victory, but this is a group of people that's settling for second best. They're settling for something that isn't God's best for them. And really, we pointed this out this morning. The language that's used helps us to discern the problem and how it happens. Verse 1 says, they saw the land. They looked at it. They were being led by sight. And they The land's good for livestock. They saw that. They raise livestock. Therefore, they should settle here and not go in. And so they don't want the promise of God. They're not going by what they hear. They're going by what they see. They're walking by sight and not by faith. Remember, faith comes by hearing and hearing the word of God. So when we start to follow the Lord, we're not led by our eyes and by what we see. We're led by our ears and what we hear. Sometimes we hear what God's telling us, and everything that we see says, don't do it, you're stupid. But you heard what God said. And you think, I've got to press forward. God said, this is what we're doing. And everyone around you is saying, can't you see what's happening? You go, I can see what's happening. But my eyes are fixed on Jesus. I've taken my eyes off this. I put my eyes on Jesus, and I'm going by what I heard. God gave me a promise, or God's told me what to do. Or I'm going to say no to this because the Bible says to say no to it. And someone else says, it's okay, just do it. And you say, I can't. I've heard something else. But don't you see how good this looks? Yeah, but I heard that even if it looks good, I heard with my ears that the Spirit said it's not good. So I'm going to go by what I heard instead of by what I see. This is a very important promise or a process that we need to recognize. And so they're not listening, they're looking. And they've given up listening. They have a promise of a specific piece of land that we'll get the dimensions of, and a whole chapter is devoted to the dimensions of the land, the actual physical location of the nation of Israel, the land that's given to them, and they don't want that. God said, this is what I want for you, and they said, we don't want what you got for us. Now, have you lived long enough as a believer to know that God has a way better plan than you do? I have. It took me a while. Sometimes it's one of those things that you're kind of, as a new believer, you feel like, oh yeah, I know the Lord knows, but I'm still pretty smart. But you get to be pretty smart until you realize you're not pretty smart. And then you realize that stuff you insisted upon actually turned out to be not really that good of an idea. And then you realize, you know what? I'm just gonna stick with what God said. He has way better ideas than me. He's a genius. Even if it doesn't look like it. But I don't go by what I see or what it looks like. I go by what I heard. So God didn't tell them to settle here. They decided that. They decided that by looking. So we want to learn from them. Don't make decisions by looking, make decisions by listening. And it's really sad how they don't want what God wants. And Moses reacts to this, verse 6. And I just want to read through this if we can. Moses' response, it's a few verses long, but boy, this is Moses. We saw him telling earlier, when they bring back these ladies, and they go, look, man, we got all these Midianite women. Like, you idiots. You can almost hear him like, what are you doing? This is what got us in trouble. Like, look at this. And he does the same thing here. Verse 6, he says, he responds as they say, we don't want to go over the Jordan. He said in verse 6, shall your brethren go to war while you sit here? Now, why will you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? That's how he sees it, that their decision is going to affect the whole nation. He says, verse 9, when they went up to the valley of Eshcol, verse 8, thus your fathers did when I sent them away to from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. And when they went up to the valley of Eshcol, and they saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the children of Israel so that they did not go into the land which the Lord had given them. And so the Lord's anger was aroused on that day, and he swore an oath, saying, surely none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years old and above will see the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they've not wholly followed me, except Caleb and Joshua, for they wholly followed the Lord. And verse 13, the Lord's anger was aroused against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years until all that generation, or the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord, was gone. And look, you've risen in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will once again leave them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all these people. That might be 38 years of frustration coming out. Moses has been wandering around the wilderness for this exact reason for 38 years. Now you guys don't want to go in? So he just, like, what are you guys doing? And he sees the effect of their decision. They would see their decision as being, and this often happens when we're compromising. They see their decision, like, this is just what we're deciding to do. This is going to affect us. But sometimes our sin affects the whole congregation. And Moses, rightly as a leader, recognizes that's not going to happen. He comes really strong against these guys, primarily because their sin is the kind of sin that he thinks that they're doing. He thinks they're not going, and that's the kind of sin that will permeate the whole congregation. And as a leader, he says, that is not going to happen. We're not going to let that happen. Now, there's an issue here. He rebukes them sharply, and it's because of his concern with the effect on the whole group. And there's a principle here revealed and this is an illustration, that leaders are responsible for the condition of the whole group. And there are certain sins that if they're tolerated, they begin to affect the whole group. And that usually is the place where a leader within the family of God, and especially in the church, we're told this very directly in the New Testament, that sin needs to be dealt with, but the issue, the tripping point when it gets dealt with is if it's starting to infect the whole body. Most of the time, we're following the principle of love covers a multitude of sin. Where sin abounds, grace abounds, right? There's plenty of grace. But once somebody is participating in sin, and then that sin is beginning to affect the group, then that's when the leader has to get involved in, and there can't be tolerance for that because it will destroy the whole congregation. And so there's this kind of a balance that we have to. It doesn't happen very often in the life of a congregation, but our general rule that we follow is there's grace. You got a friend who's struggling, there's grace. Just encourage him, grace, man. Just leave that behind. Let's walk with the Lord. But once you see a person sin and it's starting to affect others, that's the point where it's like, hey, man, that's zero. There's a zero tolerance policy when it comes to sin that is starting to spread. Now, the Lord generally keeps it from doing that. Most of the time, there's sort of a protection around a person as they grow out of stuff. And we support people with grace. We're loving to them. We're patient with people. That you all are. I am. We are. That's generally how we are. But once that sin starts to spread out, and that's what Moses is worried about, because they're going to get the consequences for their own personal decision making. Like we saw it this morning. We looked at the Joshua passage where they say we could lose our identity. We could lose worship. Yeah, that's what'll happen. Yeah, and then they make this altar and this whole shenanigans that they're doing, and they're the first group that gets wiped out by the Assyrians. There's consequences for this on them personally, but Moses is really concerned the cowardice to say we're not going to go fight. He assumes that's what they're saying, and if you guys do that, it's going to affect everybody, and that isn't going to happen. He's not going to let that one happen. But you're compromised, and if it's just with you guys, then you'll learn the hard way. We'll pray for you or whatever, but we're not going to allow the sin that's going to spread. So, having said that, they respond to him. They clarify their intentions, starting in verse 16, and they say, "Listen, we're not going to, not go fight. We'll go fight, and we're not doing what you thought we were doing." And that may or may not be true. I guess I take them at face value, but they say that's not our intention because they actually do follow through with this. But Moses accommodates them as they say, well, we'll go fight. So Moses says, well, if you'll do this, verse 20, if you're going to arm yourselves before the Lord and go and cross over, then afterwards you can come back and this will be your possession. So Moses accommodates them. And in verse 33, if you jump down, it says it very plainly. In verse 33, Moses gave to the children of Gad, to the children of Reuben, and to the half-tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of those kings that they had destroyed in their cities, and it's kind of a summary statement of all the cities that they built and all that. So this chapter is that exchange between them. They say this, he says that, but essentially they're saying, we'll go fight. And he says, okay, well, if you'll go fight, then this will but if you don't, and they go, no, we really will. We promise. And he says, well, okay, if you go fight, then this is your inheritance. Now, what's sad about that? God had something else. Like, listen, are you kidding? Maybe God didn't want them to be raising livestock anymore. Maybe it was going to be better for them in the long run to become farmers. You want to be careful about leaving what you heard for what you see, because it almost always a bad decision. So chapter 33 is an interesting chapter. Did you read this chapter? You didn't. Some of you are like, I don't know, I didn't read any of it. But you guys that read it are looking at me like, I started to read it until I realized what it was, and then I stopped reading it. Well, this is an interesting chapter. This might be one of those chapters that say, oh, the Bible's boring. Well, this is a list of cities and the journeys that maybe all the detail of it doesn't mean a lot to us. But I want you to think about something. Look at verse 1 and 2. Verse 33, or chapter 33, verses 1 and 2. It says, these are the journeys of the children of Israel. So primarily that's what we're getting in this section. These are the journeys of the children of Israel who went out of the land of Egypt. So it's going to start from there. By their armies, under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And verse 2, there's a key little phrase in here. Moses wrote down the starting points of their journeys, and here's the phrase, at the command of the Lord. And so now it's a list. These are their journeys according to their starting points. I find this very interesting that Moses writes down a detailed account of every single place where they camped and where they paused, and then where they went after that. The whole 40 years. Now, some of you, this is exciting to you. You're like, wow, he did? Like, I wonder how he did it, And you're like you got all the colored pencils, and you love, and your clothes are all organized, and some of you are like, this is amazing. You imagine keeping this kind of a detailed journal, 38 years long of wandering. You're like, and then we went here, and then we went here. It's like a whole list of all these places, every single place. I'm not that personality. I would have thought it was a good idea, and I would have started. But there would have been some point where that thing would have not kept going. I'm not saying that that's right, because I appreciate that he wrote it all down. But it's interesting. We refer to this. We don't, like, when I'm reading this, I don't really care where they went. I look at it and go, well, I sort of summarize it all as, we call it the wilderness wandering. It's 38 years of these people's lives till a whole generation. So I look at it and I think of the big picture. Okay, they wouldn't go in, the whole generation dies. It's 38 years of wilderness wandering. And I call it the wilderness wandering. But it's interesting, it says, at the command of the Lord. So while I might think of it like that, it's interesting. I think when God told Moses at the beginning, hey, write down every single place name. I don't think the Lord thinks of it as the wilderness wandering. Actually, it's interesting that since God told Moses to write down the name of every place, it's almost as if God's trying to signify to them, even though this was a big detour, every single place you were is important to me. I think it's fascinating that the wilderness wandering that I skimmed this chapter like you guys did, right? I read through it. None of these names mean anything to me. Where they are doesn't mean anything to me. But even while they were wandering, God knew every single place where they were, and he said to Moses, you write down every single place where you guys took off from. It's important to God, I guess, I would say. Somehow, even in their unfaithfulness, God remained faithful. It's as though like a father with his wandering children is just sitting there. I think of like the father maybe in the story of the prodigal son, if I could know where my son was, every single place that he is, even if he's wandering, every single place that he is would be important to me, right? It's truly an unconditional love, and here's God keeping track of all of it. Now, it's interesting. You go through all these names. There's a big list of them. Most of them we can't pronounce. There's a really interesting one. If you look at verse 29, they went from Mithkah, and they camped at Hashmonah. Now, what's interesting about that? Randy and Miri, Randy leads worship. Randy and Miri live in Yad Hashmonah. They stayed at Randy's house. I don't speak Hebrew, but it looks in English like Hashmonah. Is it Hebrew? Can you tell me? So they were at Randy and Mary's house. It's not. They live in a, it's not a kibbutz, but what do you call it? Moshav? Is it truly a moshav? So they live in one of the community, like the whole community. I guess we call it HOA here. You have the little lakeside or whatever. They kind of all share together in some sense a little bit. So I just thought that was awesome. I saw that. Hashmonah. That's a lot of friends who live in Yad Hashmonah. So apparently Israel wandered. It's not the exact same place, but same name. So that's for Randy. It's not for the rest of you, but Randy thought it was awesome. I did. Maybe I thought it was more awesome than Randy did. So, and also some dear friends of ours just had a baby. They're not living in Yadesh Manah, though, are they? They are? They're not there now. No, they're living with grandma, huh? They have a cute baby. Sorry. I'm just thinking of my friends in Israel. So we got that whole list. It tells us all these places they went. Now jump down to same chapter, verse 50. Now that change of subject. So as we finish the chapter, it says, "Now then the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan." So where are they? It says across from Jericho. Now what's interesting about this, we know where this is. This is one of those place locations, the plains of Moab, across the Jordan from Jericho. Now, if you've never been to Israel, you need to understand that there's a mountain range on the west side of the Jordan River that runs from the Sea of Galilee, or not quite the Sea of Galilee. After the Sea of Galilee, a little ways, there's a valley, but then there's this mountain range that runs along the west side of and there's the Jordan River goes along like that. And then on this side is the mountains of Jordan. If you go up those mountains, you're in Amman, Jordan. So there's these two big mountain ranges, and in the middle is a valley. It's not very far across. So we live in the valley that's similar. We have our coastal mountains, and then we have the Sierras, right? But our valley is how wide? Maybe 100 miles, something. It's pretty wide, this Sacramento Valley, right? This one's small. So if you're in Jericho, that kind of it comes up from the river and goes up, kind of slopes up, and then goes really steep. So the city of Jericho is kind of goes up. So if you're in the city of Jericho, you're at the base of this cliff, but you can look out. If it's clear, there's a lot of dust most days, but if it's clear, you see the whole valley. You could look out across the Jordan, and then the same plains right across the river is how many people? Over 1 million. 600,000 men who are over 20 years old. What do you think that looked like to the people in Jericho? I mean, you see that valley. You can see the whole length of the valley. You can see all the way down past where the Dead Sea is. If it's clear enough, it's just wide open, and it's not very wide. So here they're coming. So we know exactly where this one takes place. So they're at the end of the wilderness wanderings, and we just gave an account of every single place that they went, when Aaron died, all the stuff that happened, like a real summary statement. And now they're right there by Jericho, and this sort of sets the stage because we start reading Deuteronomy this week, and Deuteronomy is the last words of Moses that are given right there in that location, right before he dies. He goes up the mountain range on the east, that's where God takes him, and he dies, and God buries him. God takes care of him, and that's where Moses, he looks across from the mountain, he can see the land, and that's it. But they're right there. We're coming to the end of the wilderness wandering. And so they're given instructions about taking the land. Verse 52 and 53, they're supposed to drive out and destroy. Drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and destroy, and this is very important, all their engraved stones, all their molded images, and demolish all their high places. And you'll dispossess the inhabitants of the land and dwell in it, and I've given you the land to possess. So they're supposed to drive out and destroy. Now, why do they have to destroy all the images? Most of the images are pornographic. Most of their worship is related to sexual immorality. Sexual immorality is an integral part of the identity of these nations, just like it is today. I can name cities. Amsterdam, what's it known for? San Francisco, what's it known for? Los Angeles, what's it known for? New York City, what's it known for? Sacramento, what's it known for? I mean, the cities are known for, most of them, sexual immorality is a big part of the pagan worship. And so their images are pornographic. And so you need to just destroy all this. What they're doing and what they've done, you need to wipe it out. I'm judging it. And then verse 54, they're supposed to divide the land. So drive out and destroy, and then now you're inheriting it. So divide it by inheritance, they're told. And they're going to do it by lot. And then verse 55 and 56 are warnings. If you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, and here's the warning, it will be that those whom you let remain will be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they'll harass you in the land where you dwell. So if you don't deal with them, they're going to be a constant source of pain for you. And moreover, it will be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them. So what's going to happen? The disease that they have, if you don't deal with it, you're going to get the same disease, because idolatry is infectious. And it will get into your system. You got to drive it out. If there's a typology here, it's the battle of flesh against the spirit. You can't make room for the flesh. If you accommodate the flesh, it takes over, and there's no limit to what sin will happen and what sin will be part of. And that takes us to chapter 34. We've been introduced to the idea of them dividing up the land, so we're given now the boundaries of the land. And a lot of these names are ancient names, and so they kind of guess what they mean. Some of them we know, but a lot of them are guesses. But in general, we're told the land of Canaan is going to be yours, and these are its boundaries. Verse 3, the southern border will be from the wilderness of Zin along the border of Edom, so all the way down towards the Red Sea. And then your southern border will extend eastward towards the end of the Salt Sea. So that whole southern desert from Edom all the way up to the Dead Sea is their border. And then we're given these other names all the way to Kadesh Barnea. So it cuts across towards the sea, towards the brook of Egypt, and it ends at the Mediterranean Sea in verse 5. And the western border is the Great Sea. So you got the Red Sea part of it, and then they skirt over it. Now we're going up the Mediterranean. That's the western border for Israel, the Mediterranean Sea. And I think it's wonderful that God gave his people beachfront property. It's beautiful, wonderful climate. It's a lot like Southern California, except the water's warm. And even good surf. I remember in my Baker Bible Encyclopedia, one time I was looking at the background on Caesarea where Paul was held in prison, and the picture, black and white picture in my Bible Encyclopedia of that, there was a really wonderful, looked like head-high left break right there, point break right off where Paul was in prison, and I thought, man, that's how, it says later in the shipwreck when some came in on boards, it's probably when Paul learned it. He was... God had him in this beautiful Mediterranean climate where he's he's under house arrest in a palace, like getting recuperated from all of his travels. So anyway, the Mediterranean, it's this beautiful coastline that God gave them. And then that goes all the way up to Mount Hor and the northern border. And then it follows all the way around through a bunch of names down to verse 11, which is the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Kinnereth, the ancient name of it. And then it goes down, verse 12, along the Jordan River is the east border, all the way down to the Salt Sea. So it's bigger, actually, than Israel possesses today, but that's their boundaries. So then verse 7, let's see, Moses tells them they're going to divide it up. They're going to cast lots. The 3 tribes are on the other side. The other 9 tribes will divide it up here. And then they're given the names in verse 17. They're choosing a person from each one of the tribes that'll be part of the lots as they're cast. So this is designed ahead of time by God so that once they're in the land, the procedure's set. You're going to take these guys, so no one can say you ripped us off or Moses got paid off. One leader from every tribe will be there, and they'll cast lots for whose allotment the land goes to. So they're preparing for the division of the land. And then in chapter 35, we get a whole different subject, cities that will belong to the Levites. Remember, as the allotments of land are given to all the tribes, the one tribe who doesn't get any land, the tribe of Levi, because they belong to the Lord is their inheritance. He's theirs, they're his. And so they're given cities. And so that's described for us in verses 1 through 5. They're given cities. And did you notice when you read this, actually God tells them how big their cities are supposed to be? In verse 5 it says you're measuring out the city. On the east side is 2,000 cubits, on the south side 2,000, on the west side 2,000, on the north side 2,000, and then there's a city is in the middle, and this is going to be how their cities are divided up. So their dimensions are given. And then verse 6, among those cities that are given to the Levites, 6 of them are supposed to be what verse 6 calls cities of refuge. And that's a big part of this chapter because this chapter is dealing with murder. So somebody gets killed. So if it's premeditated murder, we're told in the chapter, what happens? No matter how the person did it, someone murders, it's capital crime, so capital punishment. You murder, then you get murdered. Your blood for their blood. But what if it was an accident? And one of the problems in the world today has always been there. It's what Cain and Abel. What was Cain concerned about after he murdered his brother? Someone was going to murder him. Retaliatory murder, revenge killing, feuds. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're from. Most of the genocides are some kind of blood feud. You think of this group did this to this group, and then this group waits for their chance, and when they get a chance, they do it back to this group, and this does it back to this group, and it goes on forever. And so these cities of refuge are designed to rescue a person from a revenge killing. So if you're with somebody and let's say you're working together and you're both chopping wood and something strange happens and the axe head flies off and it's totally freak accident and it kills a guy. And then you think, oh no, well then the guy's brother's like, you killed my brother and he's going to kill you for killing his brother. You flee to the city of refuge and you're safe there. And they'll check out the evidence and find out what happened. But if you didn't kill the guy on purpose, it's an accident, then you can live in the city of refuge and be safe as long as you stay in the city. The people will protect you. The guy can't get you. If you leave the city and the guy finds you, well, he didn't, and he kills you, it's not murder. Your blood's on your own head. So if this happens, where are you staying? City of refuge, man. I ain't leaving. So that kind of is laid out here. These cities are appointed for accidental killings. Verses 11 and 12 say that. If you kill a person accidentally, you can flee there, and you'll be protected until they hear the case. But verses 16 through 21, the detailed account of okay, if you strike him with a stone or with a stick or a weapon, or you're waiting for, you're lying in wait, you hit him with something, you throw something at him, then we're told, that person's a murderer and he'll be put to death. But the case of manslaughter, starting in verse 22, if it's on accident, then the person is going to be protected. So God's separating these two things and protecting the people. But as we read earlier in the study, starting in verse 29, look at verse 29, it says, "These things will be a statute of judgment to you throughout your generations and all your dwellings. Whoever kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses." One witness is not sufficient testimony against a person for the death penalty. "Moreover, you will take no ransom for the life of a murderer who's guilty of death, but he will surely be put to death. You take no ransom for him who's fled to his city of refuge." So if you're really a murderer and they prove that it was murder, the city of refuge won't protect you. You're gonna be punished with death. And then this warning that we read, verse 33, "You shall not pollute the land where you are." Murder is a pollution of the land. It's a judgment. It seems to this is under the law of Moses, but this isn't something that is tied to the law of Moses. It's tied to the land. And God said that to Cain. Remember when Cain killed his brother? What did God say to Cain? "Your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." This is like a universal law that the earth was not designed for human being blood to be shed on it. It's not the purpose of the earth. And you think of how many millions of people have been killed and murdered on the earth. It's a judgment. And so we've seen it over and over. Societies being judged because of the blood that was shed. So it defiles the land. Verse 34 said, don't defile the land. God tells them, you're inhabiting this land in the midst of it because I'm the Lord, so don't defile it. And then the last chapter, chapter 36, is a specific case. Remember we learned about these daughters who didn't have any brothers and their dad died, and there was a concern about what would happen to them with the inheritance. And so property rights, we're told under the law, will pass to the daughter, which is unique, I think, especially in the ancient world, but maybe even today, that property rights would, if there's no son, it doesn't go to an uncle, or doesn't go back to a grandfather or some other male in the family. If the father dies and he doesn't have sons, the property goes to his daughters, which I think is, I have a really close friend who lives in West Africa in a rural area, and when I met him, he and his family were living in total poverty, like one of the most poor families, probably the most poor family I've ever seen. And very, very difficult situation. And I mean, it was amazing that they were surviving. He was the oldest child, and his parents they had a farm, they had land, and the dad died. And when the dad died, the family came and they took all their stuff, and they left the mom and the three kids destitute. And in the culture, that was acceptable because there's no way that the woman is going to inherit the land. And so they came and took all the land. The uncles came, and they didn't help the family. They didn't take care of them. They just took everything. These guys were living in a tiny mud hut. It was so tragic. It was so heartbreaking. Great guy. He loves the Lord, and I know his mom, and she may have gone to be with the Lord now. She was a little bit older when I first met him, but he was just a sweet family. And I just thought, man, what a corrupt culture that the guy's family is left destitute, and all the wealth that had been there was taken by the uncles and then became theirs, and the women and children were left without. So God in his law had made that provision. I always think of that family. I read that and think, like, Lord, you were protecting women and children from evil men. And so God made this provision for them that the property will pass to the daughters. But then this issue comes up, and this is the last chapter of this book of Numbers. But it's a detail that's important. And so the chief fathers, verse 1, of the families of the children of Gilead, and this is that same family where these girls are from, and they came before the Lord. In verse 2, they said, the Lord commanded my Lord Moses to give the land as an inheritance by lot to the children of Israel. And my Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of our brother Zelophehad to his daughters. And they come up with a situation that they're concerned about. Verse 3, if they're married to any of the sons of the other tribes of the children of Israel, then their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our fathers, and it will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. So you see what they think will happen? Like, this was coming down, it was staying in our family, but then it goes to the daughters, but then the daughters, this is probably why the males end up stealing all the property, like that they'll marry into this family, and then now that property will leave our family, and it goes with this family now because she's married to that guy. And when they have their kids, it goes to it's now no longer Benjamin, it's now Manasseh or whatever. And so they go, what about that? What are we going to do? And so Moses, verse 5, he commanded the children of Israel, notice, according to the word of the Lord. So God spoke about this. So God said, what the tribe of the sons of Joseph speaks is right. So there's a concern about this, that the land would leave and go to another tribe because the woman could marry somebody. And so God said, we don't want that to happen, so here's what we're going to do. The Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, let them marry whoever they think best, so you still pick who you want. However, it has to be within the family of their father's tribe. So if you don't have any brothers and you inherit, you better hope there's a cute guy in your larger group that you're part of, because you better got to marry one of them. Because if you're going to keep the property rights, it has to stay within the tribe, so you got to marry someone within the tribe. So there's the solution for it. So God says what they say is right. The solution is marry within the tribe. And that's what happens. So that's what they did. Verse 12, they married into the families of the children of Manasseh. So they could marry whoever they want within this group. So that's the commandments, verse 13, and the judgments which the Lord commanded the children of Israel by the hand of Moses in the plains of Moab, by the Jordan, across from Jericho. So where are we at? We're right there. I mean, they're going to cross the Jordan. But we're coming to the end of the wilderness wandering. They're in the plains of Moab, and so that brings us to Deuteronomy. That you're reading, Deuteronomy 1 through 10 for next week. So we're making our way through the law, and we get to Moses' last statement to the people. So Father, bless your word to our hearts. Help us to Make good decisions. Help us to be led by the word of God and not by the seeing of the eye. Help us to walk by faith and not by sight. Deliver us from the flesh. Deliver us, Lord, from sin and its power. And we pray that you'd help us to follow Jesus. Thank you for mercy and that mercy triumphs over judgment. Even as we're looking at these chapters of so much judgment, thank you that mercy triumphs over judgment, and especially for the cross of Jesus, our Lord. And the ultimate triumph over judgment through the death of Jesus. Thank you, Lord, for coming and being our Savior. We thank you and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.